The king chose her. The kingdom never will. The whisper slipped through the grand hall like a cold draft beneath a locked door. Vivian Hartwell heard it before she saw the faces. The silver doors of Blackthorn's citadel had barely opened when hundreds of conversations softened into silence. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Golden candlelight reflected across polished marble floors. Noble families lined the hall in elegant rows, their jeweled attire shining beneath the glow. Every eye turned toward her. 3 months earlier, Vivian had stood alone in a storm while an entire pack watched her be rejected. Tonight, she stood beside the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Yet somehow the feeling was painfully familiar. The difference was not the judgment. The difference was the clothing of those delivering it. Damien Blackthorn walked beside her with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to carrying the weight of an entire nation. His dark formal coat bore the silver crest of Blackthorn. His expression remained calm, unreadable. Vivian knew another version of him. The man who sat beside a fire in a lonely cabin. The man who listened more than he spoke. The man who never once looked at her as though she needed to earn the right to exist. That memory steadied her as the royal herald announced their arrival. Every noble bowed. Vivian followed the gesture. When she straightened, she immediately noticed a woman standing near the front of the gathering. Tall, elegant, beautiful in a gown of deep emerald silk. Her dark hair was arranged with effortless perfection. Several influential nobles stood around her as though she were already royalty. Vivian did not know her name, but she instantly understood her position. The woman belonged here. Vivian did not. Lady Victoria Ashford. Someone whispered nearby. She should have been Luna. The words were not intended for Vivian. That made them even more honest. Lady Victoria's gaze met hers briefly. There was no cruelty in her expression. No jealousy. Something far more difficult. Certainty. The certainty of someone who genuinely believed a mistake had been made. The introductions began. Council members, advisors, dukes, ladies, merchants favored by the crown. Vivian did her best to remember names, but the evening quickly became a blur of polite smiles and measured scrutiny. At one point, an elderly noble greeted Damien warmly and praised his recent trade negotiations. Then he turned toward Vivian. For a moment she thought he might offer his hand. Instead, he merely nodded and moved on. The slight was small, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. A few nobles noticed. One even smiled faintly. Vivian felt the sting but refused to let it show. Eventually the ceremony dissolved into music and conversation. Servants carried trays through the crowd. Nobles gathered into familiar circles. Vivian quietly slipped away before anyone could stop her. The palace gardens welcomed her with cool evening air. Lanterns illuminated winding paths lined with white roses and ancient stone statues. For the first time all night, she could breathe. She walked slowly toward a fountain at the center of the garden. Water shimmered beneath the fading colors of sunset. Nearby, a row of towering pine trees swayed gently in the breeze. The scent reached her almost immediately. Pine. For a brief moment, the palace disappeared. She could hear rain striking a cabin roof. She could see firelight dancing across stone walls. She could remember the strange peace she had felt sitting across from a man she barely knew. The memory warmed her more effectively than the evening air. Lady Hartwell. Vivian turned. A young servant stood nearby holding a folded shawl. She looked nervous, as though approaching a future Luna required courage. The temperature drops quickly after sunset, the girl said softly. I thought you might like this. Vivian accepted the shawl. Thank you. Relief brightened the servant's face. Welcome to Blackthorn, Lady Hartwell. It was such a simple sentence. Yet it carried something she had not felt all evening. Sincerity. Before the servant could leave, another palace attendant appeared from the garden entrance. His expression hardened when he saw them speaking. Mara, he called sharply. The young servant immediately straightened. You have duties inside. The reprimand was polite, publicly harmless. Yet Mara's face fell. She lowered her eyes and hurried away. Vivian watched her disappear. A small knot formed in her chest. Even kindness seemed to carry consequences here. You made an impression already. Vivian turned toward the familiar voice. Damien approached along the garden path. Lantern light reflected softly in his silver eyes. I fear it may have been the wrong kind, Vivian said. Damien glanced toward the doorway where the servant had vanished. Understanding immediately crossed his face. They walked together toward the fountain. The sound of flowing water filled the comfortable silence between them. Still thinking about the cabin? Damien asked quietly. Vivian looked up in surprise. He smiled faintly. You always look toward the pine trees when you remember it. A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Is it that obvious? Only to me. The answer settled warmly between them. For a moment, the palace, the nobles, and the expectations faded away. They were simply two people sharing a memory. Then reality returned. They do not want me here, Vivian said. Damien remained silent for several seconds, not avoiding the truth, respecting it. Some do not. Vivian nodded. And Lady Victoria? Damien looked toward the palace windows glowing in the distance. Victoria believes she is protecting the kingdom. Somehow that answer worried Vivian more than hatred would have. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps crossed the garden. Mara appeared again, breathing hard from running. Her nervousness had vanished. Concern had replaced it. She bowed quickly. Your Majesty. Damien immediately straightened. What is it? The Royal Council has convened an emergency session. His expression darkened slightly. Tonight. Mara nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. The garden suddenly felt colder. Damien exchanged a glance with Vivian. What happened? He asked. Mara hesitated. The vote has already been completed. Silence settled over the fountain. Vivian felt her pulse quicken. Damien's eyes narrowed. A vote regarding what? Mara swallowed. Then she looked directly at Vivian. Whether the future Luna of Blackthorn should be permitted to remain inside the palace walls. The garden seemed quieter after Mara delivered the council's message. The fountain continued to flow. Music still drifted from the palace ballroom. Yet something had changed. Vivian could feel it. Somewhere inside Blackthorn Citadel, powerful people were deciding whether she deserved to remain beneath its roof. Mara lowered her gaze. I am sorry, Lady Hartwell. Vivian offered a gentle smile. You have done nothing wrong. The young servant looked relieved, but before she could leave, another attendant appeared at the garden entrance. His eyes immediately settled on Mara. You were assigned to the east corridor, he said sharply. Mara straightened. Yes, sir. Then return to your duties. The girl nodded and hurried away. As she passed Vivian, she offered a small smile. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Even after being reprimanded, she had not withdrawn her kindness. Vivian watched her disappear into the palace. Damien noticed the exchange as well. Something thoughtful flickered across his expression before he turned toward the palace. I should attend the meeting. Vivian nodded. You do not need to defend me. A faint smile touched his face. That is not why I am going. Then why? For a moment, Damien looked toward the city beyond the palace walls. Thousands of lights glimmered beneath the night sky. Because some people have forgotten what this kingdom is supposed to protect. Before Vivian could ask what he meant, he was gone. She stood alone beside the fountain. The words stayed with her. Eventually, she followed a winding path through the gardens. The farther she walked, the quieter everything became. The scent of pine drifted through the air. Once again, she found herself thinking about Blackwood Cabin, about rain against the roof, about firelight, about a king who had seemed far more at peace when nobody knew who he was. A movement ahead caught her attention. An older woman sat alone on a stone bench overlooking the city. Unlike the nobles, she wore simple clothing. Yet there was something unmistakably confident about her posture. Beautiful view, the woman said without turning around. Vivian stepped closer. It is. The woman smiled faintly. Most guests spend their first night admiring the palace. Her eyes shifted toward Vivian. You are looking at the people. Vivian followed her gaze. The city stretched across the valley below. Streets glowed with lantern light. Homes stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the moon. I suppose they are the reason all of this exists, Vivian said softly. The woman's smile widened. That is exactly what Damien used to say. Vivian blinked. You know him well. I helped raise him after his parents passed. The answer surprised her. My name is Eleanor. Recognition suddenly stirred. Vivian had heard servants mention the royal housekeeper. Few people held more trust inside the palace. Eleanor studied her quietly. The council sees an omega from a small pack, she said. The nobles see a disruption to tradition. But tonight you stood in a hall full of people trying to make you feel small, and you still looked toward the city instead of the throne. Vivian did not know what to say. Eleanor's expression softened. Perhaps His Majesty chose more wisely than they think. Warmth spread through Vivian's chest. It was the second time since arriving that someone had seen her beyond the rumors. Before she could respond, the distant sound of a palace bell echoed through the night. Once, twice, 3 times. Eleanor's smile faded. The meeting is over. Vivian's stomach tightened. She turned toward the palace. Several figures were already moving through the illuminated corridors. One of them caught her attention immediately. Lady Victoria Ashford emerged from a side entrance, walking beside 2 council members. Her expression was calm, composed, certain. The sight unsettled Vivian more than open hostility would have. Victoria looked like someone who already knew the outcome. A moment later, footsteps approached from the opposite direction. Lord Rowan Pierce crossed the garden quickly. His face was unusually serious. When he reached Vivian, he stopped. "Lady Hartwell," he said, "the council has reached a decision." The night suddenly felt colder. Vivian glanced once toward the city lights below before meeting Rowan's gaze. "What decision?" Rowan hesitated. Then he answered, "You are not being expelled." Relief flashed through her for less than a second. However, Rowan continued, "The council has demanded a condition." Vivian felt her pulse quicken. "What condition?" Rowan looked directly at her. "If you wish to remain in Blackthorn Citadel, you must leave it. If you wish to remain in Blackthorn Citadel, you must leave it." Rowan's words echoed through Vivian's mind long after they were spoken. The city lights shimmered below the overlook while the cool night breeze moved through the gardens. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. "I do not understand." Rowan nodded slightly. "You are not being expelled, Lady Hartwell. The council has approved a condition." Vivian folded her arms against the evening chill. "What kind of condition?" "A trial." The answer came quietly. "The council believes a future Luna should understand the kingdom she wishes to serve." Eleanor's expression immediately darkened. Vivian noticed. "What does that mean?" Rowan reached into his coat and removed a sealed document bearing the royal crest. "It means you are being sent to Grey Hollow." The name was unfamiliar, but the silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. "What is Grey Hollow?" she asked. Eleanor answered first. "A northern province." Her voice carried a hint of sadness. "It was once one of the strongest regions in Blackthorn." Rowan continued. "Now it struggles. Poor harvests. Failing trade routes. Families leaving to find opportunities elsewhere." Vivian looked down at the sealed document in her hands. "And the council expects me to fix this?" "The council expects many things," Rowan replied carefully. "Most of them are not particularly fair." A faint smile almost appeared on Vivian's face. "Almost. How long?" 90 days. 3 months. The same amount of time that had passed since the storm in Blackwood Forest. The same amount of time she had spent rebuilding her life. She looked toward the palace. "When do I leave?" Rowan hesitated. "Tomorrow morning." Vivian laughed softly in disbelief. That quickly? Several council members were concerned that His Majesty might convince them to reconsider. This time she did smile. The image was easy to imagine. Yet something else caught her attention. Did everyone support this decision? Rowan remained silent for a moment. No, Vivian waited. Lady Victoria Ashford argued that Grey Hollow should receive help, he finally said. She simply believed that if you hope to become Luna, you should be willing to go where Blackthorn needs you most. The answer surprised Vivian. It was not kindness exactly, but neither was it cruelty. It sounded frustratingly reasonable. Eleanor glanced toward Rowan. "You left out the part where half the council expects her to fail." Rowan sighed. "That part as well." Vivian looked at the document again. Instead of fear, she felt something unexpected. Curiosity. Grey Hollow was no longer a punishment. It was becoming a question, a test. And for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, she found herself wanting to know the answer. Later that evening, she found Damien inside the royal library. Moonlight spilled through tall windows and painted silver patterns across rows of books. Maps covered a large table near the center of the room. Damien stood alone studying them. He looked up immediately when she entered. "Rowan told you." Vivian nodded. "Grey Hollow." Damien stepped away from the table. "I argued against the trial." "I know." The council wanted something worse. His expression remained calm, but there was exhaustion beneath it. The kind that came from carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. Vivian remembered Eleanor's words. "The king always looks at the city." "Would things be easier," she asked quietly, "if you had chosen someone else?" The question settled heavily between them. Damien stared at her for several seconds. Easier. A faint smile touched his face. Probably. Vivian looked away. His next word stopped her. Better. He shook his head once. Never. Warmth spread through her chest before she could stop it. Damien moved toward the map. His finger rested on a distant northern region. Most people in this palace know Grey Hollow through reports and numbers. His voice softened. You are about to meet the people behind those reports. Vivian stepped beside him and studied the map. Mountains, forest, rivers, an entire corner of the kingdom she had never seen. Do you think I can do this? She asked. Damien looked at her. Not at the map. Not at the title everyone argued about. At her. Most people would have refused the trial. Vivian frowned slightly. Damien continued. You accepted it before knowing whether you could succeed. Something shifted inside her. It was not confidence. Not yet. But it was enough. Outside, the palace bells marked the passing hour. Tomorrow, she would leave Blackthorn Citadel behind. And somewhere in the northern reaches of the kingdom, a province she had never seen was waiting. What neither of them knew was that another letter had already begun its journey toward Grey Hollow. Not a secret order. Not a conspiracy. Simply a message bearing Lady Victoria Ashford's seal, addressed to someone who had been expecting Vivian's arrival long before the council ever cast its vote. The sun had barely risen when Vivian's carriage rolled through the northern gates of Blackthorn Citadel. Morning mist drifted across the road behind her, slowly swallowing the palace towers in the distance. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, she was leaving it behind. The journey to Grey Hollow took 2 days. Forests stretched for miles beyond the windows. Rivers wound through valleys painted in shades of green and gold. Small towns appeared occasionally along the road, each one quieter than the last. As the carriage traveled farther north, the signs of prosperity slowly faded. Empty storefronts replaced busy markets. Fields appeared neglected. Homes stood farther apart. By the afternoon of the second day, even the guards escorting her had grown unusually quiet. Vivian noticed. Have many people visited Grey Hollow recently? She asked. The older driver glanced back. Not by choice, my lady. That answer remained with her long after the conversation ended. Near sunset, the carriage crested a low hill. Grey Hollow finally came into view. Vivian had expected something grander. Instead, she found a town that looked tired. Wooden buildings lined a narrow main road. Several storefronts stood empty. A grain mill near the river appeared abandoned. Yet despite everything, people still filled the streets. Children carried baskets. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks. Farmers returned home beneath the fading light. Life continued. The carriage entered town slowly. Conversations paused as residents turned to watch. Vivian immediately recognized the look. It was different from Blackthorn Citadel, but only slightly. Curiosity, suspicion, caution. Word had arrived before she had. Someone already knew she was coming. The carriage stopped outside a modest stone building that served as the provincial administration hall. Before Vivian could step down, the front door opened. A tall man emerged. He appeared to be in his late 40s. His dark coat was practical rather than elegant. His expression suggested a man who had spent years solving problems without expecting help from anyone. Lady Hartwell, he said. Welcome to Grey Hollow. Vivian stepped from the carriage and offered a polite smile. Thank you. The man studied her carefully. Not rudely. Simply honestly. I am Samuel Whitaker, provincial administrator. Something in his tone suggested he had already formed an opinion. Whether it was positive or negative, Vivian could not tell. Samuel gestured toward the building. You must be tired from traveling. A little. Then I should warn you. A faint smile appeared. Tomorrow will not be relaxing. Vivian almost laughed. I had not expected it to be. For the first time, Samuel looked mildly surprised. He glanced toward the carriage as workers unloaded her belongings. Most visitors spend their first day asking why things are difficult. And the second? Vivian asked. They leave. The answer was delivered so matter-of-factly that she knew he was not joking. Samuel led her inside. Maps covered the walls. Ledgers filled shelves. Reports were stacked across nearly every available surface. The room felt less like an office and more like a battlefield made of paperwork. Vivian approached one of the maps. Several districts had been marked in red ink. What do these mean? Samuel joined her. Areas experiencing the greatest economic decline. His finger moved across the map. Closed businesses. Reduced harvests. Families relocating south. Vivian listened carefully. Numbers. Reports. Statistics. Yet Damien's words echoed in her memory. You are about to meet the people behind those reports. How many families have left? She asked. Samuel looked at her for a moment. Most visitors ask how much revenue was lost. Vivian glanced at him, and, for the first time since meeting her, the administrator's expression softened. Only slightly. 812 families over the last 3 years. Silence settled between them, not because of the number, because suddenly it no longer felt like a number. It felt like people, homes, lives. Samuel folded his arms. The council informed me you would be evaluating conditions. I am here to help if I can. Samuel studied her carefully. Then his eyes shifted toward a sealed envelope resting on his desk. The wax seal carried a symbol Vivian immediately recognized. Lady Victoria Ashford. Samuel noticed her reaction. This arrived yesterday morning. Vivian looked at the envelope. What does it say? Samuel's expression became unreadable. That, he replied, depends on whether Lady Victoria sent it for Grey Hollow or for you. Samuel held the sealed envelope for a moment before placing it carefully on the desk. I think this conversation can wait until morning, he said. Vivian looked at the wax seal bearing Lady Victoria Ashford's crest. Questions immediately filled her mind, but exhaustion from the journey finally began to catch up with her. Samuel seemed to notice. Your room has already been prepared. He gestured toward a staircase at the back of the building. Tomorrow, I will show you the real Grey Hollow. The words stayed with Vivian as she climbed the stairs later that evening. The room assigned to her was simple. A small bed stood beside a window overlooking the town. A wooden desk occupied one corner. No grand decorations. No palace luxuries. Yet as she opened the curtains, she found herself smiling. Below, lanterns glowed along the streets. Families gathered inside modest homes. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a violin. The sound drifted gently through the night air. It reminded her of something Damien once said during a quiet evening at Blackwood Cabin. Peace does not always come from silence. Sometimes it comes from knowing where you belong. Vivian wondered if he was still awake. She imagined him inside the royal library, surrounded by reports and council meetings. The thought made her chest ache slightly, not because she missed the palace, because she missed the person who had made every unfamiliar place feel safe. The next morning began before sunrise. Samuel arrived promptly and handed her a folded map. Today, he said, you listen. Vivian blinked. That is the plan. It is a better plan than arriving with solutions before understanding the problem. Despite herself, she smiled. Fair enough. Together, they spent the morning walking through Grey Hollow. They visited farms struggling with reduced harvests. They spoke with merchants concerned about declining trade. They stopped at a school where several classrooms sat half empty because families had moved away. Everywhere they went, Vivian noticed the same thing. People were tired. Not hopeless. Not angry. Tired. Years of disappointment had worn down their expectations. At midday, Samuel led her to a small bakery near the town square. The owner, a woman named Clara Bennett, greeted them warmly. The scent of fresh bread filled the air. Vivian purchased several loaves before realizing there were very few customers inside. Was it always this quiet? She asked. Clara hesitated. No. She glanced toward the empty tables. There used to be lines out the door. Vivian looked around the room. Everything was clean. The bread was excellent. Yet something was missing. Customers. What changed? Clara offered a sad smile. People stopped believing things would improve. The answer followed Vivian throughout the afternoon. Later, while crossing the town square, she noticed a young boy sitting alone beside a dry fountain. He could not have been older than 10. A stack of carved wooden animals rested beside him. He was trying to sell them. Most people walked past without stopping. Vivian crouched beside him. Did you make these? The boy nodded. My grandfather taught me. She picked up a small carved wolf. The craftsmanship surprised her. It is beautiful. The boy looked genuinely shocked, as though nobody had said those words in a very long time. Vivian purchased the wolf and thanked him. When she stood again, Samuel was watching from a short distance away. Most visitors never stop, he said quietly. Vivian glanced toward the boy. Why? Samuel folded his arms. Because they are too busy studying reports. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Samuel nodded once. A small gesture. Easy to miss. Yet somehow it felt important. It was the first time since her arrival that she sensed genuine respect from him. As evening approached, they returned to the administration hall. The sealed envelope still rested on Samuel's desk exactly where he had left it. The wax seal remained unbroken. Vivian stared at it for several seconds. Yesterday, it had felt like a mystery. Today it felt like part of a much larger question. Samuel noticed her gaze. "Would you like to know what it says?" Vivian looked at the envelope. Then she looked out the window, toward the town beyond. "Yes," she answered softly. "I think I am finally beginning to understand why it matters." The envelope remained untouched until late that evening. Rain tapped softly against the administration hall windows while lantern light flickered across stacks of reports and ledgers. Samuel sat across from Vivian at the large wooden desk. Neither had spoken for several moments. The letter rested between them like a question waiting to be answered. Finally, Samuel slid it toward her. "You should read it." Vivian studied the familiar wax seal. Lady Victoria Ashford, the woman many believed should have become the future Luna of Blackthorn. Carefully, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The message was surprisingly brief. "Lady Hartwell, if this letter has reached you, then the Council has already sent you to Grey Hollow. Many people will assume this assignment was designed to test you. Some will assume it was designed to remove you. They are only partially correct. Grey Hollow matters. The people there matter. Before you decide what this province needs, I encourage you to spend time learning what it has already lost. Respectfully, Victoria Ashford." Vivian read the letter twice, then a third time. When she finally lowered the page, confusion mixed with curiosity. "That is all." Samuel nodded. "That is all. I expected something different." A faint smile touched Samuel's face. "Most people do." Vivian folded the letter carefully. The message felt sincere. Not warm, not unfriendly, simply sincere. It sounded like someone who genuinely cared about Grey Hollow. The realization complicated everything she thought she understood about Victoria. The next morning brought heavy clouds and steady rain. Despite the weather, Samuel insisted on continuing their tour. "Some problems only appear when it rains," he explained. Vivian quickly discovered he was right. Several roads became difficult to travel. Water pooled near damaged drainage channels. Small businesses struggled with deliveries delayed by poor infrastructure. Yet what caught her attention most was not the rain itself. It was the way people responded to it. No one complained. They adapted. They carried on. At midday, Samuel guided her toward a narrow section of town near the river. The buildings there were older than the rest of Grey Hollow. Paint peeled from storefronts. Several windows remained boarded shut. A few residents watched quietly as they passed. "This area used to be one of the busiest trade districts in the province," Samuel explained. "What happened?" Vivian asked. Before he could answer, an elderly man stepped out from a nearby workshop. His hands were covered in sawdust. His clothing was worn but clean. "People stopped coming," he said. Samuel smiled faintly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holloway." The older man nodded before turning toward Vivian. "You are the King's Omega." The title caught her off guard. Not because it was insulting, because there was no judgment attached to it. Only curiosity. "My name is Vivian," she replied. The old craftsman studied her for a moment. Then he pointed toward the carved wolf hanging from her satchel. The same carving she had purchased from the young boy in the square. "You bought that?" Vivian touched the small wooden wolf. "I did." The old man smiled. "My grandson made it." Recognition immediately flashed between them. "He is very talented." The craftsman's expression softened with unmistakable pride. "Thank you." For a moment, the years seemed to disappear from his face. Most people walked past his stand without stopping. Samuel glanced toward Vivian, then toward the craftsman. Neither said anything. They did not need to. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes. By the time they left, several other residents had joined them. Not because Vivian was the future Luna. Not because she represented the crown. Because she listened. As they walked away, Samuel remained unusually quiet. Finally he spoke. "Do you know what the council expected you to do?" Vivian shook her head. "Review reports. Conduct inspections. Write recommendations." Samuel looked back toward the growing group gathered outside the workshop. "Instead, you remember names." The word surprised her. Samuel smiled slightly. "That may prove far more useful." For the first time since arriving in Grey Hollow, Vivian felt something changing. Not in the province. In the people. A small shift. A small opening. The beginning of trust. Yet as evening settled over the town, a messenger arrived from Blackthorn's citadel, carrying news that neither Vivian nor Samuel expected. The council was requesting her first official progress report, and according to the attached instructions, they wanted it delivered within 48 hours. The request from the council changed the atmosphere of Grey Hollow almost immediately. 48 hours. That was all the time Vivian had been given to explain a province she had only begun to understand. The messenger departed before sunrise the following morning, leaving the official notice behind on Samuel's desk. Vivian read it twice. The instructions were precise. The council wanted measurable progress, economic projections, trade forecasts, infrastructure assessments, numbers, charts, predictions. She lowered the document slowly. They want proof. Samuel leaned against the window overlooking the town square. They want evidence that sending you here was worthwhile. Vivian looked toward the streets below. Merchants were opening their shops. Farmers were unloading wagons. Children hurried toward school carrying books beneath their arms. What if the most important changes cannot be measured yet? Samuel smiled faintly. Then you have discovered the same problem that has frustrated Grey Hollow for years. Throughout the day, Vivian continued visiting businesses and families across the province. Everywhere she went, people greeted her a little differently than before. Not warmly. Not yet. But the suspicion was beginning to fade. Clara Bennett waved when Vivian passed the bakery. The young boy with the carved animals proudly displayed new pieces he had finished overnight. Even several merchants who had ignored her arrival now stopped to exchange a few words. None of these moments would appear in a report, yet Vivian felt they mattered. That afternoon, Samuel escorted her to a farming district several miles outside town. Rolling fields stretched across the valley beneath a bright blue sky. Some crops were thriving. Others struggled. An older farmer named Daniel Mercer met them near a weathered barn. He spent nearly an hour explaining the challenges facing local growers. Rising transportation costs, aging equipment, fewer workers. Vivian listened carefully, asking questions whenever she could. Eventually Daniel paused and studied her. You know, he said, most officials come here to tell us what we are doing wrong. Vivian smiled. And what do I do? The farmer chuckled softly. You ask what happened. For some reason, the answer stayed with her long after they left. That evening, Vivian sat alone in her room, reviewing notes by lantern light. Pages filled with observations covered the desk. Economic concerns, infrastructure issues, community needs. Yet the more she wrote, the more dissatisfied she became. The reports felt incomplete. They described problems. They did not describe people. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Samuel entered carrying 2 cups of tea. You look frustrated. Vivian laughed quietly. Is it that obvious? He handed her a cup. Only because I spent years feeling the same way. Vivian glanced at the growing stack of notes. The council wants numbers. Yes. But numbers are not why Grey Hollow is struggling. Samuel pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Then tell me why it is struggling. Vivian thought carefully before answering. People stopped believing anyone was listening. Silence settled across the room. Samuel stared at her for several seconds. Then he slowly nodded. That, he said quietly, is the most accurate assessment of Grey Hollow I have heard in a decade. Something shifted in Vivian's chest. Not confidence exactly. Validation. For the first time, she felt as though she might actually understand the challenge before her. Later that night, after Samuel returned home, Vivian stepped onto the small balcony outside her room. The town below glowed beneath hundreds of lanterns. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted through the evening air. She found herself wishing Damien could see this place. Not the reports, not the statistics, the people. Without thinking, she pulled a sheet of paper from her satchel and began writing a letter. She told him about Clara's bakery, about the carved wolf, about Daniel Mercer and the farms, about Samuel, about the small changes she was beginning to notice. By the time she finished, the moon had climbed high above the valley. A faint smile touched her lips. For the first time since arriving in Grey Hollow, she felt hopeful. The following morning, however, that hope was interrupted by unexpected news. Another rider arrived from Blackthorn Citadel. This time the message was not from the council. It carried the personal seal of Damien Blackthorn. And according to the messenger, the king himself was already on his way to Grey Hollow. The messenger had not exaggerated. Damien Blackthorn arrived in Grey Hollow before noon the next day. Word spread through the province faster than any official announcement. Shopkeepers stepped outside. Farmers paused their work. Children ran through the streets, sharing the news. Yet when the king's carriage finally entered the town square, many residents seemed surprised. There were no grand banners, no ceremony, no royal procession stretching across the roads. Damien arrived with only a small escort and immediately stepped down onto the cobblestones as though he were visiting old friends rather than inspecting a struggling province. Vivian spotted him from the administration hall window. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The reports, the council, the pressure, the uncertainty. Damien looked up at the exact same moment. His expression softened instantly. The sight of it made her smile before she could stop herself. Minutes later, they stood together in the square beneath a bright afternoon sky. "You came all this way for a report?" Vivian asked. Damien glanced toward the bustling streets around them. "I came because your letter was far more interesting than the council's report requests." A quiet laugh escaped her. "That sounds like something you would say. It sounds like something you wrote." The familiar ease between them returned almost immediately. Yet Vivian noticed something else. Damien was watching the people of Grey Hollow with genuine interest. Not because he was a king conducting an inspection, because he wanted to understand what she had seen. Samuel joined them shortly afterward and guided Damien through the province. Together, they visited the bakery. Clara Bennett nearly dropped a tray when she realized who stood in her shop. They visited the school. They walked through the market district. They spoke with merchants, farmers, teachers, and craftsmen. Everywhere they went, Damien listened. The same way Vivian had listened. The same way he had listened to her months ago in a small cabin deep within Blackwood Forest. By late afternoon, a crowd had begun forming naturally around them. Not because anyone had been summoned, because people wanted to talk. For years, many residents had believed nobody beyond Grey Hollow cared about their struggles. Now the future Luna and the king were standing in front of them asking questions and remembering names. It felt different. It felt personal. That evening, Samuel invited several community leaders to the administration hall. The gathering was informal. No speeches, no ceremonies, just conversation. Vivian spent hours listening as residents discussed their concerns and ideas. Some spoke about trade. Others discussed transportation routes. A teacher suggested community apprenticeship programs. A merchant proposed reopening partnerships with neighboring towns. For the first time, Vivian noticed something remarkable. People were no longer speaking only about problems. They were speaking about possibilities. After the meeting ended, Samuel remained behind to organize notes. He looked around the room, now empty except for himself, Vivian, and Damien. "Do you know what happened tonight?" he asked quietly. Vivian shook her head. Samuel smiled. People showed up expecting to complain. His eyes moved toward the stack of proposals covering the table. Instead, they stayed to help. The realization settled over the room. Grey Hollow had not changed overnight. The roads were still damaged. Businesses still struggled. Families still faced challenges. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Hope had returned. The next morning brought unexpected confirmation. When Vivian entered the town square, she found dozens of residents already gathered. Clara stood beside several local business owners. Daniel Mercer had arrived from the farming district. The elderly craftsman, Mr. Holloway, stood proudly near the front. Even the young boy who carved wooden animals had come. Vivian slowed, confused. "What is all this?" Clara stepped forward, holding a folded document. "We heard you needed to send a report to the council." Vivian blinked. "How did you know that?" Samuel cleared his throat from somewhere behind the crowd. Several people laughed. Clara handed her the document. "Then we decided they should hear from us too." Vivian unfolded the pages. Her eyes widened. Hundreds of signatures covered the paper. Merchants, farmers, teachers, craftsmen, families, residents from every corner of Grey Hollow. At the top, a single sentence had been written in careful ink. She listened. She stayed. She helped us believe again. For several seconds, Vivian could not speak. The square fell silent. Even Damien looked genuinely surprised. Then Daniel stepped forward. "The council sent you here to evaluate us." The farmer smiled warmly. "Turns out we have been evaluating you too." Gentle laughter spread through the crowd. Tears threatened to form in Vivian's eyes. Not because they supported her, because they understood her. After months of doubt, judgment, and uncertainty, an entire community was standing in front of her and saying the same thing. We see you. Damien glanced around the square, then toward Vivian. Pride shone openly in his expression. He did not step forward to speak for her. He did not need to. Grey Hollow was already speaking. Yet far away in Blackthorn Citadel, another gathering was taking place. Lady Victoria Ashford stood beside a council chamber window, listening as reports from Grey Hollow were read aloud. One by one, council members fell silent. And for the first time since Vivian Hartwell had entered their lives, nobody in the room was discussing whether she belonged there. They were beginning to discuss what would happen if she did. 3 days later, the council chamber of Blackthorn Citadel was fuller than it had been in months. Council members occupied their usual seats. Advisors stood along the walls. Noble families watched from the gallery above. News from Grey Hollow had traveled faster than anyone expected. Not because of economic reports. Not because of official statements. Because hundreds of residents had signed their names beneath a simple message that was now resting on the council table. She listened. She stayed. She helped us believe again. Vivian stood beside Damien near the front of the chamber. The same hall that had once greeted her with whispers now felt strangely different. Familiar faces remained. So did old traditions. Yet the atmosphere had changed. No one was asking whether she belonged there. They were waiting to hear what happened next. The council chairman cleared his throat and lifted the report from Grey Hollow. For several minutes, he reviewed economic forecasts, transportation plans, community initiatives, and infrastructure recommendations. The details mattered. The progress mattered. Yet everyone in the room seemed drawn to the final pages. The pages filled with signatures. Farmers, merchants, teachers, craftsmen, families, hundreds of ordinary people. When the chairman finished reading, silence settled across the chamber. It was Lady Victoria Ashford who finally rose to her feet. Every eye turned toward her. Vivian felt her pulse quicken. Months earlier, hearing Victoria stand would have filled her with dread. Now she simply listened. Victoria glanced toward the signatures before looking directly at Vivian. When this process began, she said calmly, I believe Blackthorn required a Luna prepared by tradition. The chamber remained silent. I believed experience, education, and noble training were the most important qualifications. No one interrupted. Victoria folded her hands before her. I was not entirely wrong. A few council members nodded. Then Victoria continued. However, I was not entirely right either. The room grew even quieter. The purpose of leadership is not to impress a kingdom. Her gaze remained steady. It is to serve one. Vivian could hardly believe what she was hearing. Victoria looked toward the council. Grey Hollow did not ask for perfection. They asked to be heard. Lady Hartwell gave them something this council has struggled to provide for years. She paused briefly. Attention. Several members lowered their eyes. Victoria finally turned back toward Vivian. The faintest smile touched her face. I misjudged you. The words were simple, honest, more powerful than any speech. Something loosened inside Vivian's chest. Not because she had won. Because understanding had finally replaced opposition. Lord Rowan Pierce stood next. I move that the council officially recognize Lady Vivian Hartwell's completion of the Grey Hollow trial. Another member rose. Then another. One by one, voices joined together. Not unanimous at first, but enough. More than enough. The motion passed. Applause slowly spread through the chamber. It began among the visitors in the gallery. Then the advisors. Then several council members. Vivian looked around in disbelief. Months ago, these same walls had nearly rejected her before giving her a chance. Now the room stood in recognition. Damien never looked away from her. The pride in his expression was impossible to hide. Later that afternoon, word spread throughout Blackthorn. The news traveled through markets, schools, businesses, and homes. Messages arrived from Grey Hollow almost immediately. Clara Bennett sent a basket of fresh bread. Daniel Mercer sent a handwritten note. Mr. Holloway sent a carved wooden wolf nearly identical to the first one Vivian had purchased from his grandson. Samuel's message was the shortest. You listened. We believed. Thank you. Vivian read it twice before carefully folding it away. That evening, the royal palace hosted a formal gathering unlike any held before. Citizens from across the kingdom filled the great hall. Representatives from Grey Hollow had traveled for hours to attend. Mara stood proudly among the palace staff. Eleanor watched from the front row. Samuel occupied a place of honor beside regional leaders. Even Victoria attended, not as a rival, but as a respected guest. As the ceremony began, Damien stepped forward. The hall gradually fell silent. His voice carried clearly across the room. Leadership is often mistaken for authority. He looked toward Vivian. In truth, leadership begins with compassion. The crowd listened carefully. Months ago, many people questioned whether Vivian Hartwell belonged in Blackthorn. A few embarrassed smiles appeared among the nobles. Damien's expression softened. Today, the kingdom has answered that question itself. He extended his hand toward her. Vivian stepped forward. The room rose to its feet. Hundreds of people stood together. The sound echoed through the hall like a wave. For a moment, Vivian could not move. She remembered Silver Creek. She remembered rejection. She remembered the storm. She remembered believing she had been forgotten by the world. And now an entire kingdom stood before her. Not because she had demanded respect, because she had earned trust. The official declaration followed. The future Luna of Blackthorn was no longer a future possibility. It became reality. The chamber erupted into applause once again. Yet the moment that touched Vivian most came later. After the ceremony, after the speeches, after the crowds began to disperse, she found Samuel near one of the palace balconies overlooking the city. "You came all this way," she said. Samuel smiled. "I would not have missed this." He looked out across Blackthorn's lights. "Do you remember our first conversation?" Vivian laughed softly. "You did not seem particularly impressed." "I was not." The honesty made her smile wider. Samuel turned toward her. "I thought the council had sent another visitor." He shook his head. "I was wrong." The words carried genuine warmth. "Grey Hollow will always consider you one of us." Emotion caught in her throat. Before she could respond, Samuel offered a respectful bow. Not to a future Luna, to Vivian. The gesture meant more than titles ever could. Later that night, when the celebrations finally ended, Damien approached her with a familiar expression. Calm, quiet, certain. "There is somewhere I would like to take you," he said. Several hours later, beneath a sky filled with stars, they arrived at a place Vivian recognized immediately. Blackwood Cabin stood exactly where she remembered. Pine trees swayed gently around it. Moonlight rested across the roof. For a moment neither spoke. Then Vivian laughed softly. "You planned this." "Perhaps." They stepped inside together. The fireplace still stood against the stone wall. The chairs remained near the hearth. The cabin felt untouched by time, like a memory waiting patiently to be revisited. Damien lit the fire. Warm light filled the room. Vivian stood quietly beside the window, looking out toward the forest where everything had begun. "It feels smaller now," she admitted. "That is because your world became larger." She turned toward him. For several moments neither spoke. They did not need to. Every challenge, every mile, every doubt, every victory, somehow it had all led back here. Damien finally crossed the room and stopped beside her. "Months ago, you asked whether things would be easier if I had chosen someone else." Vivian smiled. "I remember." A faint smile appeared on his face. "My answer has not changed." Warmth filled her chest. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the trees. Somewhere deep within the forest, a wolf howled softly in the distance. Not lonely, not searching, simply present. Damien gently took her hand. The gesture felt natural, familiar, certain. No ceremony was needed. No council vote. No title. No approval. The bond between them had already been built through trust, kindness, and time. Vivian looked down at their joined hands before lifting her eyes to meet his. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, she felt completely at peace. The kingdom had finally seen her. But standing there beside the man who had seen her first, she realized something even more important. She had finally seen herself. The fire crackled softly. The forest remained quiet. And as the night settled around Blackwood Cabin, the story that began with rejection ended with belonging.